Welcome to the Understanding the Management Role to Improve Management Performance module. This is an ILM module and is brought to you by Professional Futures. Hello, my name is Marie O'Donnell and I will be taking you through this module of study. In this video, we will be exploring the characteristics of all organisations, including stakeholders and stakeholder analysis. With every video, we will start with learning objectives. So by the end of this session, you will be able to describe the characteristics of all organisations, identify the different types of organisation structure and their key characteristics, identify the advantages and disadvantages of the different types of structure, discuss the role of the manager and management, explain what is meant by organisational development, and define the term stakeholder and conduct a stakeholder analysis. Let's start by defining the term organisation. So write down what you think an organisation is and pause the video while you do this. Welcome back. So let's start by looking at how to define an organisation. Organisations can be defined as social arrangements for the controlled performance of collective goals, or a social unit of people systematically structured and managed to meet a need or to pursue collective goals on a continuing basis. And this has brought out some useful characteristics that we can start to explore next. As we can see, there are different ways of defining an organisation. According to the Business Dictionary, there are three main components or characteristics, namely structure, purpose, and people. Now, if we look at this in simple terms, we can see that all organisations do have some kind of structure, with defined relationships between the functions and individual positions within the organisation, and that should enable the organisation to achieve its purpose. And the purpose are the business objectives that will be achieved by people. And organisations can be affected by the environment in which they operate and by wider forces in the global arena. So an organisation could, therefore, be said to comprise of the following characteristics: having a defined purpose, defined goals and objectives, a defined structure to deliver the required outputs, defined individual roles and responsibilities, defined levels of authority and accountability, and finally, defined relationships between functions or departments and individuals. Over to you. Turn to page 4 in your workbook and complete the activity. Or spend a couple of minutes looking at your own organisation. How is your structure defined? And how many levels of management exist? Make some notes. When we look at the structure of our organisations, we tend to think about it in terms of how the organisation is physically organised, and there are many ways in which an organisation can be structured. So here are some factors that can affect how an organisation is structured. Starting with corporate strategy, goals and objectives, people, other resources such as machinery and equipment, market trends, levels of organisational and individual competence, reward systems, processes, geography, and finally, produce or service lines. Over to you. Turn to page 5 in your workbook and complete the activity. If you're not using the workbook, spend the next 10 minutes researching the different types of organisational structure and their key characteristics. Welcome back. It is likely that you identified many different structures, including many different team structures. You may have found that there can be some overlap between the types of configuration. From the diagram here, we can see that at the top there is the senior management team, or even a board of directors, This is made up of a managing director or chief executive and a board of directors. And their job is to provide the strategic direction for the organisation. The senior management team will be supported by a number of other tiers or layers, the next layer being the middle managers. These managers act as a bridge between the senior management team and line managers. The third layer are line managers, whose responsibility is to lead the team that produce the organisational outputs, in other words, the workforce. And within the workforce, there could be supervisors that are employed to lead sub-teams and supervise specified tasks and activities. Now, an organisational infrastructure tends to take one of 4 discrete forms: tall, flat, hierarchical, and centralised or decentralised. And each of these are different and they meet different organisational needs. So let's start by looking at tall organisations first. If we look at this diagram, we can see that a tall organisation usually has many levels of management and supervisors are also present. So this means that there is a long chain of command from the managing director down through several layers of management before it gets through to the workforce. Now, it would be unlikely to have lots of layers of management, for example 7 or 8 layers of managers, because this would greatly dilute the management control, and arguably this could make the organisation quite inefficient and ineffective. If we look at the flat organisational structure, we can see how this type of structure is in stark contrast to the tall one. A flat organisation will have relatively fewer layers, or probably just one level of management, and as a result, the chain of command from top to bottom is short, and the span of control exercised by the manager is quite wide. So this is a structure that it could be argued that is more suitable to smaller organisations. If we now look at the hierarchical organisational structure, we can view this structure as a combination of a tall and a flat structure. And this is because there are several distinct levels within the organisation that provide that hierarchy. Now, this type of structure typically does look like a pyramid, for example, a wide base, the workforce, and supported by several layers of supervision and management, leading up to a single point, the managing director. Let's now look at centralised and decentralised organisational structures. So for centralised, there will be a head office and the senior management team will work from there. They will make the decisions, so the power and authority is held at a central location. For decentralised, they will delegate responsibility for decision making to the lowest levels of authority that work for the business, for example, local branches of a national bank. Now, organisations may decide to combine centralisation and decentralisation because that might be more effective for them. For example, they may retain certain functions like accounting, human resources, marketing and purchasing at the head office to save costs. But other tasks, such as recruitment, may be carried out at the offices outside of the head office so that management can recruit and employ staff at a local level with the right skills and knowledge to carry out the role. Over to you. Turn to page 11 in your workbook and complete the activity. If you're not using the workbook, spend the next 30 minutes considering tall and flat structures and summarise the advantages and disadvantages of each. Let's start by exploring the advantages and disadvantages of a tall organisation structure. So one advantage is that each manager has a small number of employees under their control, so that enables close supervision of employees. However, employees are not typically empowered to take responsibility and they enjoy little freedom of action to make decisions, and this can be quite demotivating. Another advantage is that there is a clearly defined management structure enabling staff to understand individual and corporate responsibilities and functional boundaries. However, Decision making can be slow when approval is required from higher levels of management, and communication can be slow as information has to cascade up and down through several layers of the organisation. And finally, as an advantage, there is a clear structure for progression and promotion. However, management costs can be inflated because of the high number of managers employed. Let's now look at the advantages and disadvantages of a flat organisation structure. One advantage is that it generates more direct communication between management and the workforce, and this enables speedier and smoother communication. However, the functions of each department or person can become blurred, and that can lead to confusion over who is doing what. Another advantage is that it can encourage strong team spirit where everybody supports each other, but it can also lead to a lack of clarity for the workforce where employees have more than one manager. It's also less bureaucratic, enabling easier decision making because you don't have to go up all those different levels in a hierarchy to get a decision. However, the structure is not easily transferable to large organisations, and it's typically limited to smaller organisations which do require a more agile structure. And finally, another advantage is that the management costs are reduced because there are less managers. However, that may limit the growth of the organisation, where managers can become a jack of all trades and master of none. Over to you. Turn to page 13 in your workbook and complete the activity. If you're not using the workbook, consider the organisation structure used by your organisation. Draw the structure and highlight where you fit in. Welcome back. As you will have identified, all organisations have one thing in common. They all have managers and management to oversee the work undertaken by the organisation. And if we start to analyse the role of the middle manager next, we will see how they have very broad responsibilities. On one hand, they are responsible for one or more functions within the organisation, for example, purchasing or finance or HR. However, they'll often have additional responsibilities, for example, project management. So now it's over to you. Turn to page 14 in your workbook and complete the activity. Or, obtain the job descriptions of up to 3 managers in your organisation. What specific responsibilities do they have? What are the key elements of these roles as middle managers? Welcome back. Your analysis might suggest that middle managers are responsible for the following core functions, and we'll start with organisational performance, because middle managers oversee delivery of the organisation's output, and this is through a number of things. First of all, effective resource management, including staff recruitment, prioritising and coordinating work. Through effective problem solving. Through motivating staff and rewarding them. Through resolving staff conflict and maintaining a positive working environment. Through enforcement of quality and safety standards, and through employee development, including training and succession planning. Let's continue with the role of the middle manager. Supporting strategic development. Middle managers contribute to the development of organisational strategy by providing timely, meaningful information and advice to senior management. Communications. They provide the essential link between senior management and the workforce. As such, they are responsible for providing the workforce with a clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities to enable them to complete the work. Explaining to the workforce management decisions and direction, and providing senior managers with feedback from the workforce. For the next part of this session, we're going to explore strategy. To get you started, scan the QR code to read an interesting article written by Michael Porter for the Harvard Business Review. Pause the video while you do this. Welcome back. We're now going to look at mission, vision and value statements. Most organisations have a vision and/or a mission statement that defines its purpose. Some also have a statement of values. The purpose of these statements is for the organisation to convey the strategic direction of the organisation, and often in an inspirational way. So a mission statement sets out the purpose of an organisation. The values are a set of principles that guide decision making. And the vision statement, this is more detailed, more specific, and often more motivational than a mission statement. If we look at the vision statement of McDonald's, the world's largest fast food company, we can see how this is more detailed, specific, and more motivational than a mission statement. McDonald's vision is to be the world's best quick service restaurant experience. Being the best means providing outstanding quality, service, cleanliness and value, so that we make every customer in every restaurant smile. And you can see there how they are tapping into people's feelings to make it more motivational. A mission statement typically defines the organisation's purpose and primary objectives. Its primary function being to define the key measures of the organisation's success. For example, let's look at the Walt Disney mission statement. The mission of the Walt Disney Company is to be one of the world's leading producers and providers of entertainment and information. Using our portfolio of brands to differentiate our content, services and consumer products, we seek to develop the most creative, innovative and profitable entertainment experiences and related products in the world. We can therefore see how this mission statement focuses on what constitutes success for the organisation. Being creative, being innovative, being entertaining, but also being profitable. Once your organisation has produced its vision and mission statements, the next stage is to produce a set of organisational goals. A goal describes a high-level target, usually to be achieved over 3 to 5 years. So they set the direction of the organisation and they support the mission statement. And they're often quite vague and they can be difficult to quantify and measure. Objectives, on the other hand, are more specific and they are shorter termed, for example, in the next 12 months. But the objectives should contribute to the achievement of the long-term goals, and they should be SMART. And SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and time-bound. And if you produce well-defined objectives, you should ensure that they also incorporate their own key performance indicators. And we can see how these measures are very important, because without them it would be impossible to manage the objectives and gauge whether we were achieving our goals. Over to you. Scan the QR code to read about SMART objectives from the Chartered Management Institute. Pause the video while you do this. If we look at the hierarchy here, we can see how the vision, the mission and the organisation goals and objectives would be set out in your strategic plan. The plan would permeate throughout your organisation in the form of action plans which would define how your objectives would be achieved. And the whole purpose should ensure that your organisation has a clear definition around what it is looking to achieve, but also that every person in your organisation understands their role within it. As a middle manager, you would usually be expected to ensure the delivery and implementation of the strategic goals and objectives. Some organisations do not have an effective strategic plan, and the danger here is that they tend to drift and lose their way. Indeed, having no plan would be like trying to find your way through a strange city without a map. Over to you. Turn to page 17 in your workbook and complete the activity. If you're not using the workbook, obtain a copy of your organisation's strategic plan. Then go online to compare the similarities and differences with similar organisations. Let's look at stakeholders next. Stakeholders can be defined as people or groups who are affected by and affect the performance of your organisation. Another way to help you identify your organisation's stakeholders is to ask yourself one simple question. If your company ceased to exist tomorrow, who would be affected? Over to you. Turn to page 18 in your workbook and complete the activity. If you're not using the workbook, consider your own organisation and identify the stakeholders within it. Welcome back. You probably identified many of the stakeholders who are on this illustration, and perhaps some may come as a surprise to you. For example, the media. How might they be interested in your organisation? How might they affect what you do? For example, could they create good or bad publicity for you if they agreed or disagreed with your activities? A simple way of identifying stakeholders is to create a stakeholder map like the one shown here. Of course, this map only tells us potentially who is affected. For example, if you were doing this for a change project at work, it doesn't attach any importance to the stakeholders themselves. So to get a better understanding of the level of interest a particular stakeholder has, we should get some understanding of their power and interest. So let's look at the next slide for a better understanding of this. So let's look at how to conduct a stakeholder analysis using the power interest matrix. This illustrates that stakeholders can have different levels of interest and power on an organisation, and this influences our relationship with our stakeholders. So by categorising each stakeholder, it can be easier for us to determine our strategy, and it also indicates how often we should communicate with stakeholders in each group. So let's look at each category. Category A. If a group has low interest and low power, then an organisation does not have to pay much attention to this group. For Category B, if a group has a high interest but low power, we need to keep these stakeholders informed, because although they have low power to influence the organisation, if we don't keep them informed, they could, for example, create bad publicity for us. Category C. If a group has a low level of interest but a high level of power, we need to keep those satisfied. If they become dissatisfied, they could become key players and move to Category D. However, because they have high power, if they move to high interest because they have become dissatisfied, this could create problems that need to be resolved by the organisation. For example, employees may become dissatisfied with pay and go on strike, and that would hinder the organisation's achievement of their objectives. And finally, we have Category D. High interest, high power stakeholders are key players that need to be managed and consulted. Category D stakeholders could be seen as critical, requiring more attention than all of the other categories. Over to you. Turn to page 21 in your workbook and complete the activities. If you're not using the workbook, undertake a stakeholder analysis, assessing and categorising stakeholders by importance. Also consider whether the relationship is formal or informal and the implications. Then consider your assessment and analyse how the various stakeholders in your organisation have influenced or do influence the way that the organisation operates. We have explored the characteristics of all organisations and how they are structured, including how to conduct a stakeholder analysis. You now understand how important strategy is in terms of ensuring the organisation goes in the right direction and doesn't drift, as this quote from Michael Porter would suggest. And finally, if you are ever faced with questions from your staff such as, "Why do I need to do this boring job?" or "How does this task help the organisation?" you will be able to help them see where they fit into the overall achievement of the company's goals and objectives. In other words, you will help them to gain a sense of worth, which is very important in terms of motivating them. Having completed this session, you have now met the following objectives. You've described the characteristics of all organisations. You've identified the different types of organisation structure and their key characteristics. You have identified the advantages and disadvantages of the different types of structure. You have discussed the role of the manager and management. You have explained what is meant by organisational development. And finally, you have defined the term stakeholder and conducted a stakeholder analysis. In video 3, we will look at the difference between leadership and management. That's it for now. See you in video 3. Visit our website where you can access the full course on understanding the management role to improve management performance. This includes a really useful assignment guide with lots of top tips to help you pass your assignment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you never miss a new unit. And finally, enjoy watching your next video.